This is the story of a redlined parade schematic, a downgraded carriage assignment, and the precise moment Queen Camilla realized that wearing a crown does not grant you the right to command the armed forces. In less than 48 hours, what began as a highly calculated attempt to hijack the military, epicenter of the king's official birthday parade ended in a devastating, highly visible institutional humiliation. It happened not with a public confrontation, not with an explosive tabloid leak, but with the cold, unyielding reality of Ministry of Defense protocol. When Camilla reviewed the final logistical binders for the June 2026 Trooping the Colour, fully expecting her name to be positioned at the absolute center of the sovereign military salute, she found her carefully engineered tactical matrix entirely dismantled. In that singular freezing second, her 30-year illusion of absolute power collapsed. What this video will unpack is the anatomy of a silent total dismantling of a military power grab. We are going to examine the secret administrative maneuver Camilla attempted behind closed doors as the royal family prepared for the most significant global display of British statecraft of the year. We will expose the hidden paper trail she generated in an effort to alter the ancient marching orders of the household division, attempting to secure the ultimate military salute for herself to intentionally overshadow the Princess of Wales. Most importantly, we will reveal how Prince William and Princess Anne forensically intercepted this maneuver. Acting as the ultimate guardians of the bloodline's military authority, they used the strict, uncompromising protocols of the British Armed Forces to execute a flawless silent checkmate. By the end of this analysis, you will understand the terrifying reality that has left the Queen Consort completely paralyzed. She may share the king's titles, but she absolutely does not command his armies. To understand the true weight of this military reckoning, we must first look at the massive illusion of absolute power Camilla had spent 3 decades constructing. Her journey within the House of Windsor is a masterclass in psychological endurance and calculated patience. For 30 years, she weathered the fiercest storms of public outrage and media hostility, slowly transforming herself from the ultimate outsider into the anointed Queen Consort. She played the long game with chilling precision. She systematically paved over the historical legacy of Princess Diana, quietly integrated her own companions into the royal machinery, and operated under the unwavering belief that she held King Charles completely under her control. As the reign transitioned and King Charles faced mounting physical challenges, Camilla's survival instinct evolved into an open display of absolute ownership. She began to view the transitional vulnerabilities of the crown not as a constitutional crisis, but as an administrative window of opportunity. In her mind, the king's signature was her signature, and his ultimate authority was a weapon she could wield to secure her own unassailable status. She looked at the fractured royal landscape, saw Catherine away from the public eye, focusing on her health, and believed she was completely, undeniably untouchable. She assumed that wherever the king went, her rules would automatically dictate the environment, even on the sacred grounds of Horse Guards Parade. But that detail matters because absolute power often breeds a fatal kind of arrogance. And Camilla's arrogance led her to cross the one invisible line that the true heirs of the bloodline had sworn to defend with their lives. The trigger for this silent warfare was a highly classified administrative maneuver centered on the upcoming 2026 Trooping the Colour. For the British Monarchy, this annual parade is not merely a birthday celebration, it is the ultimate geopolitical theatre. It is a massive convergence of military might, aristocracy, and global media. Whoever commands the centre of gravity during this event dictates the visual narrative of the royal family for the entire year. What appears to be true based on the frantic shifting of military logistics is that Camilla's office quietly attempted to manipulate the operational blueprints of the Ministry of Defense. As the king's public schedule required delicate management, the machinery of the state required a formal update to establish the exact positions of the royal family during the carriage procession and the balcony salute. It was within these highly sensitive military drafts that Camilla attempted her ultimate power grab. Utilizing a network of loyal advisors, her camp quietly inserted a sophisticated series of administrative amendments into the parade schematics. The objective was as audacious as it was unprecedented. Camilla was seeking to establish a dual salute framework. She requested that her carriage be elevated to the primary sovereign position, explicitly bypassing the traditional hierarchy of the working royals. Furthermore, she demanded that upon arrival at Horse Guards Parade, The 7 regiments of the Household Division direct their primary royal salute and not just to the king but simultaneously to her as a co-commander. It was a stealth campaign to elevate her status from a supportive civilian spouse to an active military gatekeeper of the modern monarchy. This maneuver was born of staggering commercial desperation. Camilla possesses no vast historical legacy of her own. She holds no independent military rank that was earned through service. She realized that by hijacking the visual real estate of the armed forces' most sacred event, she could artificially inflate her standing. She calculated that if the global press photographed the King's Guard offering her the supreme sovereign salute, it would permanently rewrite her status broadcasting to the world that she had finally conquered the old guard and eclipsed Catherine's highly anticipated return to the spotlight. She assumed that the Ministry of Defense, eager to accommodate the king ahead of a grueling public event, would quietly rubber stamp the paperwork. She believed she could slip this massive appropriation through the administrative cracks, but she fundamentally misunderstood the ruthless institutional discipline of the true heirs. Prince William did not discover this secret maneuver through palace gossip or staff leaks. He uncovered it because he operates the institution with a cold forensic discipline. As the Prince of Wales and the Colonel of the Welsh Guards, William maintains absolute oversight of the military logistics concerning the Household Division, and he was not working alone. Standing alongside William was the ultimate guardian of the family's traditional military legacy, Princess Anne, as the Colonel of the Blues and Royals and the most respected working royal in the armed forces. Anne has dedicated her entire life to protecting the strict boundaries of the Bloodline's military command. When the modified drafts of the Trooping the Colour Protocol crossed the desks of senior military planners, the irregular amendments regarding the Queen Consort's military elevation were immediately flagged and delivered directly to the true heirs. What William and Anne discovered was a calculated exploitation of the king's physical exhaustion to build a visual fortress for the civilian faction within the armed forces. It was a direct insult to the uncomplaining sacrifice of the working royals who spend decades earning the respect of the military. William saw this not merely as an act of social vanity, but as a direct threat to the pristine preservation of the sovereign command. The response from the true heirs was a masterclass in weaponized restraint and absolute institutional coldness. William and Princess Anne did not stage a dramatic intervention. They did not confront Camilla in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, nor did they allow a single word of this internal crisis to reach the public press. They understood that in the high-stakes theatre of royal warfare, a public scandal weakens the crown, but a silent administrative execution destroys the opponent permanently. They allowed the illusion of her success to continue just long enough for her to become entirely exposed. They let her styling team finalize her military-inspired wardrobe. They let her believe that the Trooping the Colour parade would be the ultimate monument to her 30-year climb. They allowed her to prepare for the global spotlight, convinced that she had finally outmaneuvered the Prince and Princess of Wales. And then the trap snapped shut with a terrifying silent finality. Utilizing his absolute legal leverage within the Household Division and Anne's deep influence over military protocol, William initiated an overriding administrative correction. They did not merely delete her amendments, they invoked strict, uncompromising armed forces regulations regarding the chain of command. They restored the original structural parameters, flawlessly ensuring that civilian associates could never hijack the sovereign salute reserved exclusively for the bloodline. When the final unalterable logistics binders for the parade were locked into the Ministry of Defense database and delivered to Camilla's private quarters, the reality of her defeat was laid bare in black and white. The primary sovereign carriage position was explicitly revoked. Her request for the dual salute was entirely denied and marked as an unauthorized breach of military protocol. What looked like a routine security update was actually a total dismantling of her empire, proving to the entire court that her power was nothing more than a temporary illusion. Trapped, deeply humiliated, and realizing that her grand military debut had been completely erased by the silent hands of her stepson and sister-in-law, Camilla sat in her private apartments. She looked at the downgraded carriage assignment that relegated her to the civilian periphery of the parade. In a state of absolute panic, she reached for the secure telephone line and desperately dialed King Charles, expecting the man who had fought for her for 30 years to demand the arms. Forces reversed their decision and saved her from the cold fury of the true heirs. The phone call from Camilla to King Charles was supposed to be the moment the monarch stepped in to crush the administrative rebellion and restore her military authority. For over 30 years, Charles had been her ultimate shield against the establishment. He had torn apart his first marriage, defied the late Queen Elizabeth II, and risked the very survival of the British monarchy to ensure that Camilla would one day occupy the global stage by his side. In her panic, as the reality of Prince William's brutal military checkmate set in, she expected that same unconditional protection. She expected the king to pick up the secure line, summon the Ministry of Defence executives to the palace, and demand an overriding royal decree to force the household division to grant her the primary sovereign salute. But what she received instead was the most devastating psychological blow of her entire royal life. When Charles answered the phone, he listened to the frantic demands of his wife. He heard the humiliation in her voice as she explained that the parade schematics had been locked, that her carriage assignment had been mercilessly downgraded, and that ancient military protocols had been weaponized against her public debut. And then there was silence. It was not a silence of contemplation, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a man who suddenly realizes the definitive limits of his own authority. Charles did not rage against his heir. He did not promise to call the commanding generals to fix it. Instead, in a quiet, defeated tone, he told her there was nothing he could do. That is the exact moment the illusion of absolute power shattered permanently. Camilla realized that her husband's profound love did not equate to institutional protection. To understand why Charles refused to save her grand military strategy, we have to look at the cold, hard mechanics of royal survival. Charles is deeply aware that his reign is transitional and fragile, and he knows that the allegiance of the armed forces is the absolute bedrock of the monarchy. To publicly override his son and his sister on an issue of strict military protocol just to feed his wife's vanity would be an unmitigated disaster. William and Anne had brilliantly framed the schematic correction not as a personal vendetta against Camilla, but as a rigid administrative adherence to the chain of command. If Charles intervened to force the Kingsguard to offer a supreme military salute to a civilian consort against the advice of his own generals, he would look incredibly reckless, weak, and profoundly out of touch with his duty to protect the crown's heritage. Faced with a choice between protecting Camilla's social ambition and preserving the untainted dignity of his own reign, Charles chose the crown. This brings us to the staggering reality of Camilla's structural desperation. The public often assumes that because she wears the Queen's crown, she possesses the Queen's commanding authority over the state apparatus. Nothing could be further from the truth. The brutal reality that William's forensic audit exposed is that Camilla actually commands absolutely nothing. The armed forces swear allegiance to the monarch and his legitimate heirs, not to the civilian spouses who occupy the palace guest rooms. Camilla's access to the military theatre is essentially least entirely dependent on her proximity to the reigning king. Her desperate push to hijack the Trooping the Colour parade was never just about riding in a nicer carriage. It was a frantic attempt to stockpile visible historical influence precisely because she possesses no structural power behind the scenes. She knows she is a consort operating on borrowed time. She was trying to use the nation's most sacred military display to build a global fortress that William could not tear down. But the logistical audit proved her total vulnerability. She is merely a high-status tenant of the throne, operating within boundaries rigidly defined by the true bloodline. When the morning of Trooping the Colour finally arrived, the world tuned in to watch the pageantry. Entirely unaware of the invisible warfare that had just concluded behind palace walls, the spectacle proceeded flawlessly. But for the seasoned military observers and royal watchers who understand the hidden mechanics of the parade, the event carried a completely different, humiliating meaning. As the procession moved down the mall, Camilla was completely sidelined. She did not ride in the primary sovereign position. When she arrived at Horse Guards Parade, the humiliation became absolute. As the magnificent regiments of the household division marched past the royal dais, executing the legendary eyes right maneuver, they did not look at her. The supreme synchronized military salute was directed with laser precision entirely past the Queen Consort, honoring the King, the Prince of Wales, and the Princess Royal. The armed forces were sending a clear, undeniable message. Dictated by William's locked ledgers, they respect the bloodline, and they merely tolerate the consort. This structural realignment was profoundly evident in how Catherine, the Princess of Wales, quietly held the institutional future. While Camilla was reduced to nursing the wounds of her downgraded carriage assignment, Catherine effortlessly secured the ultimate visual legacy of the monarchy. Nature abhors a vacuum, and power in the royal family never simply disappears, it is redistributed. Catherine did not gloat over the collapse of Camilla's military power grab. She did not leak triumphant stories to the press. Her execution of power was entirely visual, and devastatingly precise. Catherine appeared at the parade radiating absolute unshakable authority. She did not need to manipulate Ministry of Defence drafts to secure her relevance. As the Colonel of the Irish Guards, she wore the regimental colours with uncomplaining grace, bearing the genuine military affiliations that she has spent years earning through steadfast dedication. Every time Catherine stepped into the frame, she served as a walking, breathing reminder of William's impenetrable bloodline. The contrast could not have been more brutal. Here was Catherine effortlessly commanding the respect of the armed forces by absolute right, while Camilla watched from the periphery, her unearned military grab quietly bleeding out in the shadows. Following this devastating checkmate, subtle administrative shifts began sweeping through the royal operations rooms, palace staff taking their cues from the new centre of gravity established by William and Anne, quietly executed a series of protocol corrections. The access codes to the primary military planning ledgers were updated, explicitly requiring dual authorization from the Prince of Wales for any future state event logistics. The side doors to the military endorsement machinery were bolted shut. It is a daily, inescapable reminder to Camilla that she may occupy the highest social position in the land, but she will never be permitted to exploit the armed forces for her own commercial or visual desperation. What this story ultimately reveals is the profound evolution of Prince William. He is no longer just the grieving son walking behind a coffin, nor is he merely a dutiful heir waiting his turn. He has become a ruthless, hyper-competent architect of royal survival. He understands that the monarchy is a business, a brand, and a continuous historical thread tied directly to the state's military, and he will not allow its most sacred assets to be plundered by interlopers acting out of vanity. Camilla thought she was playing a game of visual dominance, but William was playing a game of institutional preservation. He let her reach the very height of her arrogance, let her broadcast her military intentions to her inner circle, and then he simply pulled the administrative floor out from under her. She has been left with the one thing she always wanted, the title of queen, only to realize it is an empty vessel. She is a queen in name, living in a gilded cage, managed, audited, and entirely controlled by her stepson. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the hidden power dynamics of the royal family. If you found this forensic breakdown insightful, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more long-form analytical content. Let me know in the comments below, do you think Prince William and Princess Anne were right to use Ministry of Defence protocols to block the Queen Consort, or was it a step too far? I read every single comment, and I will see you in the next video.